Hello and welcome to this video. Today I would like to speak about the Fantastic Menagerie Tarot by Baba Studio. The Fantastic Menagerie Tarot by Baba Studio is one of my all-time favorite tarot decks, and I would never want to be without it. I have been reading with this deck for several years, the first edition that is, and Baba Studio recently released the second edition of this deck. It was released in November 2020 and I received my copies last week. This second edition comes in two sizes. There is a standard size deck and there is also a large limited edition deck that comes in this beautiful wooden box here. The reasons I love the Fantastic Menagerie so much are, first of all, I love everything that Baba Studio produces. I am a long-time admirer of their textile work. I have several of their handbags, and I also love their tarot bags and the way they print images on textile. They make beautiful scarves too. And also they have released several tarot decks in the last 2 decades, and their tarot decks are absolutely exquisite. Each of their deck is heavily themed, but they usually work within the frame of the Rider-Waite-Smith system, and each of their deck is usually very easy to read with for someone who is used to the Rider-Waite system. None of their deck is a clone. None of their deck is a Rider-Waite-Smith clone. And sometimes the images they use for their cards are very different from the traditional representation of the card in the Rider-Waite-Smith original deck. But the way they work with their images is extremely witty and intelligent and beautiful, and each card is always a very intelligent rendition of the original Rider-Waite-Smith card, and it's very easy to read with when you are used to the Rider-Waite-Smith deck tradition. Another reason why I absolutely love this deck is because I love the work of Granville. Granville was a French illustrator from the 19th century, and my grandmother used to absolutely love the work of Granville, so she introduced me to Granville's work when I was a kid. And his work is extremely funny. He has illustrated several books. For example, he has illustrated this edition of the La Fontaine Tales, and also he was an illustrator for. He was a satirical illustrator for political press. So his illustrations are usually very witty and very to the point, and quite sarcastic, quite funny in a caustic sort of way. And you can feel this caustic humor in the Fantastic Menagerie Tarot. I have several books with the illustrations from Granville, and sometimes I can find the illustration that Baba Studio used for their card. For example, in this La Fontaine tale of Le Lion et le Moucheron, you can see this illustration here with a fly is antagonizing this big lion, and this is the basic for the card that this is the basic illustration that Baba Studio used for their strength card. And also in this little book here, which is by the way, this is a soft cover book. It's not expensive, so if you like Granville illustrations, you can see that you can get them in you don't have to pay a lot of money for a beautiful book. You can also get them in cheap books. So in this illustration of Balzac Tales, this illustration here is Le Roi des Pingouins, the Penguin King, and Baba Studio has used this image to make their King of Cup card. And in this beautiful book here, you can also find several images that Baba Studio has reused for their card. For example, here you have one image that Baba Studio used for their Three of Swords. I mean, almost all the images you can find again in their cards. Here in this dance lesson illustration, Baba Studio has reused the central character, the violin player, and they have used him for their Hanged Man card. So, back to Baba Studio Fantastic Menagerie Tarot. The first edition came with the companion book, and the first edition companion book was written by Sophie Nusselet. The second edition book is slightly different, and this time it's written by Karen Mahoney herself. While I'm usually not interested in companion books, I have always loved each and every companion book that Baba Studio made for each of their decks. Each of them is full of information. It goes well beyond just explaining how to read a card. There is a lot about the creative process, a lot about the theme of the deck, and I mean they really are not in the same league as most other companion books. So I recommend getting the companion book if you are going to splurge on a Baba Studio deck. And I am happy I own the two versions of this book because it's slightly different. It's not the same author, and both of them are really interesting. So back to the deck itself. First, a word about the sound you might hear in the video. I am sorry, I have closed my windows, but the noises from the street are still very audible in the video, and I'm sorry about that. Anyway, so the first edition of this deck used to come in a flap tuck box, so I have put it in this Baba Studio beautiful bag here. And it like that. And the second edition, the standard size, comes in this beautiful sturdy clam box style cardboard box. And the large edition is a treat. It's insanely beautiful. So there is this beautiful wooden box here, this gold linen pouch, and the cards themselves, which are the same as second edition but in a larger format. Here we go. And the reason I really wanted to show both versions, both editions of this deck, is because I was extremely surprised at how different the two decks, the two editions, feel. They are similar in that they mostly use the same images. Actually, the only image that is completely different is the Four of Cups. Baba Studio used this illustration for the Four of Cups of their first edition, and they changed to this one for the second edition. And this is the only real change in illustration throughout the whole deck. This is the only card that doesn't have the same illustrations. All the other cards, there are slight changes in the way the illustrations is treated. For example, you see here the first edition is here and the second edition is here. For example, here in this King of Wands, you can see that the colors are not the same. The color of the pants of the King are not the same. And very often in the second edition, Baba Studio has put blue in the background to show blue sky. There are color changes like that throughout the deck. You also have this kind of difference where you can see that the rainbow in this Ten of Cups card is much more visible in the second edition than it used to be in the first. And also smaller changes like the size of the bottles. The 9 champagne bottles at the feet of this elephant in the Nine of Cups, they are larger in the second edition, and also you can see the blue sky here in the second edition again. Same here, blue sky in the second edition. And of course, in the second edition, there is this beautiful new method that Baba Studio has used in their last decks. The cold stamping method, which you might see even better in a larger card, where, let's see if it shows, yes, I think you can see that, where they use this method that looks like there is metallic colored ink on certain parts of the image, and I don't think it's actually metallic. I think it's another process. It's very technical and I can't really explain. You might want to have more information on the Baba Studio's website, but the first edition did not have that. The first edition was a simple print, and the second edition has this beautiful technique here that gives a lot of depth to each of the cards. See here, okay. Some of the cards like this one, this is Ace of Cups, don't have that many visible alteration from one edition to the next, but the vibe you get from the second edition is extremely different from the vibe you get from the first edition. And this is the first time I feel this change of atmosphere so strongly in the Baba deck. I mean, in the Baba deck from one edition to the next. I think it comes from the cold stamping, because the cold stamping very slightly blurs the lines. The black lines of the design are paler and a little bit softer than they used to be in the first edition, and I don't know if you can see that. And also the use of the cold stamping makes the colors appear a little bit paler, maybe more pastel, so that the overall feeling of the deck is different. The first edition, to me, felt like a very witty and direct and caustic deck with a very dry sense of humor, and it is a beautiful reading deck, and it gives extremely precise readings, but the way it talks is dry and dark humor style, and it does not cut corners, and it tells you the truth as it is without tenderness. It's fun, but it's not tender, and I love it for that reason. But the second edition, I can tell, is of course it's still witty, and it still has the sense of humor that Granville puts in his illustrations, but it's much more soft. It's softer, and it is not as dry sense of humor. It's a little bit easier on the ears. If it's going to tell you, if it is going to tell you a hard truth that you might not want to hear, This one is going to give it to you as it is, and this one might be a little bit more soft in the way it delivers it to you, if that makes sense. I think it is the first time I feel such a difference between one edition and the next. Of course, all Baba decks, in each edition has its specialty and its special charm, and each edition it will be different from the next, but it's the first time I see such a difference of vibe, such a difference in atmosphere, that makes me think that I'm not going to use this deck as I will use this deck. And I love them both, and I will use them both, and I know I'm not going to quit using the first edition because I now have the second edition. I will probably use them for different readings. Sometimes I will choose this one because it is softer, and sometimes I will use this one because it is more direct and sarcastic, if that makes sense. Another difference that I wanted to mention is that very often Baba Studio decks contains more than 78 cards, and in the first edition you had a 79th card, that was this one, with the same backs as the rest of the deck. In the second edition you do not have a 79th card, you have 78 beautiful cards, and there is an additional this card in the deck, but it cannot be used as a 79th card because it doesn't have the same backings as the rest of the deck. So I think I'm going to frame it. But actually in the large limited edition you get 2 Page of Swords, because there was a slight misprint in the initial Page of Swords. The line here is silver, whereas it is gold for all the rest of the deck, so they have provided an additional Page of Sword with the gold line, so you can place whichever one you want in the deck, and I think I'm just going to keep both in the deck. This difference of atmosphere is, as I said, it's the first time I have felt it in Baba Studio's work, and I wanted to give you a few examples. So let me illustrate this. Here I have the Bohemian Gothic Tarot. I have 3 different versions of the Bohemian Gothic Tarot. There are more than 3 versions. There is 3rd edition, which I'm not showing here. The 3rd edition comes into there's 1 standard size and 1 mini size, and there is also another version of this 2nd edition that comes without the pewter gilding. But anyway, let me show you these 3 versions of the same deck. So this is the 1st edition, which I use all the time. Probably the one I use the most, actually. Probably the 1st edition of the Bohemian Gothic. And it's stunning. Then there is the very special silver version of the 1st edition, which is the same images, but with silver ink added in some parts of the images. And I'm not sure the camera is picking them up really well, but the difference visually is very visible, and the atmosphere in this deck is absolutely stunning. The cards in the silver edition looks like daguerreotypes, very old photograph, extremely atmospheric deck. And then you have the 2nd edition that comes on a different cardstock. It's slightly thicker and maybe a little bit more old-fashioned cardstock, and the edges are pewter gilded, which is beautiful. It looks like liquid moonlight here. And this specific cardstock, I love the sound it makes when you shuffle. It makes a shh, shh, shh sound that I love. So you have 3 different versions of the same deck, which each of them has its specific charm, but all in all, when I go from one to the other, I don't feel like I'm reading with a totally different deck. It still has the voice of the Bohemian Gothic Tarot by Baba Studio. There is one deck by Baba Studio that with which I did experience a change of voice between the first edition and all the subsequent, the 2 subsequent editions. It is the Baroque Bohemian Cats. So here I have the first edition here and the second edition here. And you see, Baba Studio used those beautiful, elaborate margins, borders for the first edition, but they did not use it for the second and third edition. The images are larger and the margins, the borders are much more simple, so it does look quite different. And because of this elaborate borders here, the first edition of this deck looked a little bit more feminine and a little bit more freely to me. To me, the first edition has a slightly softer and less intense voice than the second and third edition. And I mean, let's not be fooled here. This deck, whatever the edition, and even with the theme of costumed cats, it packs a punch and it gives extremely good readings and very to-the-point readings. It can treat all subjects up to the most serious of subjects for a reading. But the voice is slightly different. And in the Fantastic Menagerie, I guess maybe I don't have, maybe the experience I have with the second edition is not intense enough yet, because I only had this deck for 1 week, but I can tell that the voice is not the same. It is still the voice of the Fantastic Menagerie, but it's really more subdued in the second edition. So this is why I really wanted to make this video and to make it as a comparison between the first and the second editions. And I hope you enjoyed it. I didn't show all the cards. There are several reviews of the second edition of the Fantastic Menagerie on YouTube. And for example, Simon from the Hermit Cave made a beautiful review where he's showing all the cards. And for my part, I already have shown all the cards of this first edition deck in another of my videos when I was comparing the Fantastic Menagerie Tarot by Baba Studio to another deck that uses Granville's imagery by another company, not Baba Studio. So I already have a video where I show all the cards, so I didn't want to do that today. But my point was to show the difference between the 2 editions and to tell you how beautiful this deck is. And I think I'm going to love both editions equally, and I'm going to continue using the first while I'm going to enjoy the second immensely. And I will finish by saying that Baba Studio's decks are more expensive than the average tarot deck, but what you get for what you pay is really a work of art. It's more than a simple tarot deck. The care that goes into designing each image, making it, turning it into a smart rendition of the original Rider-Waite-Smith card, making it beautiful, and then the care that is put into producing the deck with this beautiful cardstock, this beautiful cold stamping, and the beautiful boxes, etc. It is so worth it. It is so worth the money. And I will encourage you, if you like Baba Studio decks in the future, take advantage of the pre-orders. I always do that. They offer early bird price for pre-orders if you pre-order the deck long enough in advance before the launch. Okay, I am losing the daylight very fast now, so I think it's time to put an end to this video review, and I thank you very much for staying with me until the end. Bye bye! A quick word about the backs. So the backs of the first editions are this design with the bird. The second edition has a very different back with this intricate teal and gold vines. And the large limited edition has a quadruple bird. It reminds me a little bit of the first edition, the design, but it's made in different colors and with this cold stamping method, and on a light blue, delicate, lacy background. So these are the backs.